Frankie Rowe was trying his best not to stare. He reminded himself he was only here for the paycheck, a paycheck he desperately needed to pay off mounting debts that threatened to bury him. When he'd signed up to be an exotic companion, he'd figured it would be easy money. Smile, look pretty, maybe be pampered a little, no strings attached. But he hadn't expected her. Manda was breathtaking. Her skin was a shimmering shade of blue, almost luminescent under the golden lights of the grand hall. Her eyes were a shade of violet so vivid they seemed to glow, framed by lashes long enough to cast shadows on her high cheekbones. Her hair, dark as midnight, tumbled over her shoulders in soft waves, catching the light with each graceful movement. She stood at the center of the room, commanding attention with effortless elegance, surrounded by admirers who hung on her every word. Frankie could see why. There was something magnetic about her, a presence that demanded his gaze even when he knew he should be playing it cool. He adjusted his collar, suddenly conscious of how out of place he felt. The outfit they'd given him was finely tailored, but he still felt like an imposter amidst the opulence of the banquet hall. Everywhere he looked, there were alien aristocrats draped in luxurious fabrics that shimmered like liquid gold, adorned with jewels that sparkled with every movement. That air was thick with exotic perfumes and the hum of conversation, musical and strange to his ears. This wasn't his world. Hell, this wasn't even his galaxy. But credits were credits, and he was in no position to turn them down. He just had to get through this gig, play his role as the exotic human, and walk away with enough money to settle his debts and maybe get his ship out of impound. Simple. At least, that's what he kept telling himself. "You must be the human I requested," she said, her voice a melodic purr that sent a shiver down his spine. "I was beginning to think they'd forgotten my order." The gathered nobles laughed, their laughter echoing with a musical, chiming quality. Frankie's face burned with embarrassment. He wasn't used to being the butt of the joke, especially not in a room full of creatures who looked at him like he was a novelty item. "Order." Frankie's pride flared, but he forced a charming smile. "Frankie Rowe, at your service," he replied smoothly, giving a little bow. Frankie shot her a defiant look. "Should I roll over? Beg? Or would you prefer I fetch?" The room fell silent, shocked gasps rippling through the crowd. Manda's eyes widened, and for a moment, he saw something break through her amused facade. Surprise, followed by intrigue. She laughed, the sound rich and genuine, and Frankie couldn't help but feel a spark of satisfaction. "Oh, this one has spirit," she mused, sauntering towards him. Her hips swayed with a grace that seemed almost rehearsed, deliberate. Frankie's mouth went dry. She stopped just inches from him, tilting her head as if examining a curious creature. Up close, he could see the faint glow of circuitry pulsing under her skin, a reminder of her species' technological superiority. "Do you even know who I am?" she asked, her voice a whisper meant only for him. "Someone who thinks they own me," he shot back, refusing to break eye contact. Her eyes flashed with excitement. "Oh, I like you, Frankie Rowe." She circled him slowly, the sharp click of her heels echoing off the polished floors. Most humans would have bowed by now, or at least wagged their tails. "Guess I missed the obedience training," he quipped, crossing his arms. Her laughter was musical, tinged with genuine amusement. She stopped in front of him again, this time closer. Frankie's heart skipped a beat as he caught her scent, something sweet and intoxicating, like alien flowers blooming under starlight. Manda's fingers trailed up his chest, resting just above his heart. Her touch was cool, her nails faintly luminescent. "You're not like the others," she murmured, almost to herself. "Maybe I won't get bored as quickly as I thought." "Glad to entertain you," Frankie said, his voice steady despite the rapid thumping in his chest. Manda's lips curved into a smile, wicked and inviting. "Oh, you're going to be more than entertaining. But don't forget your place, human." Her finger tapped his chest, right over his heart. Before she stepped back, her expression once again playful and distant. "You're mine now." Frankie opened his mouth to argue, but the words died on his lips as she turned and walked away, her hips swaying provocatively. He watched her go, his pride stinging and his curiosity ignited. "She thinks I'm her pet," he realized, fists clenching. "But she doesn't know who she's dealing with. If Manda thought she could break him, she was in for a surprise." Frankie Rowe wasn't the kind of man who rolled over easily. But as he watched her disappear through the shimmering doorway, he couldn't shake the feeling that maybe, just maybe, he didn't want to fight her as much as he thought. The days that followed were a delicate dance of power and flirtation, each interaction a new battle of wills. Frankie quickly learned that Manda was as cunning as she was beautiful, and she delighted in testing his patience. She paraded him around her estate like a prized pet, her fingers constantly brushing his arm, her voice dripping with playful condescension. "Isn't he adorable?" she purred to her guests, who'd coo and giggle as if he were some exotic puppy. Frankie gritted his teeth through every humiliating encounter, his only comfort the spark of mischief in Manda's violet eyes. She was doing it on purpose. The two could play that game. Frankie made a point to defy her, in small ways, taking a seat before she offered, speaking out of turn, giving her just enough sass to keep her on her toes. And every time, Manda's eyes would narrow, her lips pressing into a line that only barely concealed her amusement. "You're quite the rebellious little pet," she teased one evening, leaning casually against the balcony railing as they overlooked the shimmering gardens. Her metallic dress glowed faintly under the moonlight, highlighting the curves that haunted Frankie's dreams. Most humans would be groveling by now. Frankie leaned beside her, deliberately invading her personal space. He watched her eyes widen at his boldness before she composed herself, her shoulders straightening. "I'm not most humans." Manda's gaze slid to his lips before flicking back to his eyes. "No, you're not," she agreed, her voice dropping to a whisper. "That's why I haven't sent you back to the pet shop." Frankie's jaw tightened, but before he could fire back, she pushed off the railing. "Come. There's someone I want you to meet." He followed her through the grand hallways, trying not to notice how her hips swayed with each step. She led him into a ballroom where dozens of her people mingled, their crystalline laughter echoing off the domed ceiling. Humans moved among them, dressed in extravagant garments that barely concealed their status as living accessories. Frankie's stomach churned at the sight. Manda's fingers tightened around his arm, her possessive grip sending an unexpected thrill through him. "Stay close," she murmured, her voice almost protective. Before he could question it, she was dragging him toward a group of nobles draped in shimmering fabrics that seemed to flow like liquid. "Ah, Manda," one of them greeted, his eyes drifting to Frankie with mild curiosity. "Acquired a new pet, I see." Frankie bristled, but Manda's grip on his arm tightened. "Yes," she answered smoothly, her tone light but laced with warning. "And he's quite special." Her fingers trailed down Frankie's arm, lingering just long, enough to send a shiver through him. "A bit unruly, but nothing I can't handle." The nobleman chuckled. "You always did like a challenge." Manda's smile was coy. "Challenges make life interesting." Her gaze flicked to Frankie, her eyes gleaming. "And this one is proving very interesting." Frankie's heart pounded as he met her gaze, his body reacting to the promise hidden in her words. He was suddenly aware of how close she was standing, the heat of her body radiating through the thin fabric of his shirt. Before he could respond, the music changed, a haunting melody filling the room. Manda's eyes lit up. "Dance with me," she commanded, not waiting for his answer as she pulled him to the center of the ballroom. He had no choice but to follow, his body moving instinctively to the rhythm as Manda pressed herself against him, her curves fitting perfectly against his body. Her hands rested on his shoulders, fingers curling possessively, while her eyes never left his. "You're enjoying this," Frankie accused, his voice low, his hands settling on her waist. Manda's laugh was a soft, breathy thing that sent heat pooling in his stomach. "You're a delightful plaything, Frankie. I've never been this entertained." Her lips were close enough to brush his ear, her voice a whisper. "Tell me, does it bother you, being my pet?" Frankie's fingers tightened on her waist. "I'm no one's pet," he growled, his pride flaring. Manda's eyes sparkled, her smile wicked. "Prove it." His mouth was on hers before he realized what he was doing. It was fierce and demanding, a clash of power and desire. Manda responded instantly, her body arching into his as her fingers tangled in his hair. Her lips were soft, her taste intoxicating, and for a moment, Frankie forgot everything. The room, the nobles, even his anger. All that existed was Manda, her scent enveloping him, her body pressing into his as if she couldn't get close enough. When they finally broke apart, both were breathless, eyes locked in a silent battle of wills. Manda's cheeks were flushed, her pupils dilated, but her smile remained triumphant. "Well," she murmured, her voice a touch unsteady, "perhaps you're not so tame after all." Frankie's chest heaved, his pulse racing. "I told you, I'm not like the others." Manda's gaze softened, something vulnerable flickering in her eyes before she quickly masked it with a teasing grin. "No, you're not," she agreed, stepping back just as the music ended, leaving him standing alone in the center of the room, breathless and aching. She turned on her heel, her hair flowing behind her like a silken wave. "Come along, Frankie," she called over her shoulder. "The night isn't over yet." And just like that, she was gone, leaving Frankie to follow, his heart pounding and his resolve shaken. He was beginning to realize that Manda was far more dangerous than he'd anticipated. Morning arrived too soon, the soft glow of dawn seeping through the ornate windows, casting golden light over tangled sheets and bare limbs. Frankie awoke to find Manda curled against him, her hair a cascade of midnight silk across his chest. For a moment, he allowed himself to savor the quiet intimacy, his fingers tracing the delicate lines of her back. But reality came crashing down as the door burst open. "Manda." A voice sliced through the air, cold and sharp. Frankie bolted upright, instinctively shielding Manda as a figure strode into the room. Tall and imposing, the man's golden robes shimmered with authority, his eyes blazing with fury. Frankie recognized him from the banquet, a high-ranking noble, one who'd watched Frankie with disdain. Manda's body went rigid against him. "Father," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Father." Frankie's blood ran cold. This was her father, one of the most powerful figures in her race's hierarchy. The man's eyes raked over them, his face contorted in rage. "What is the meaning of this, Manda? Consorting with a human?" He spat the word as if it were poison. Manda scrambled from the bed, her composure cracking. "Father, I can explain." "There is nothing to explain." Her father's voice boomed, shaking the walls. "You have disgraced our family, lowered yourself to his level." Frankie's fists clenched, his anger flaring. "Hey, I'm right here, you know." The noble's eyes snapped to him, cold and calculating. "Silence, pet. You don't speak in my presence." The word stung, but Frankie lifted his chin defiantly. "I'm nobody's pet." The man's face darkened, his hand twitching as if tempted to strike. "You dare defy me? You are nothing but a toy, a plaything for my daughter's amusement." He turned to Manda, his expression hardening. "And you have allowed yourself to be tainted by this creature." Manda's face paled, her hands trembling. "Father, please, you will be punished for this," he declared, his voice cold. "Both of you." He snapped his fingers, and guards stormed into the room, their weapons trained on Frankie. Manda's eyes widened. "No. Leave him out of this. It was my choice." Her father's gaze softened, just for a moment, before his jaw tightened. "You are my daughter. My hair. You don't get to make foolish choices." He turned to the guards. "Take the human. Dispose of him." Quietly. Frankie's heart lurched. Dispose. Like he was trash. Panic surged through him as the guards advanced, their expressions emotionless. "No," Manda screamed, throwing herself between Frankie and the guards. "You can't do this." Her eyes were wild, desperate. "He's not just some human. He's—" Her voice broke, tears glistening on her cheeks. "He's mine." Her father's face twisted with disgust. "You would defy me for this inferior being." Manda's shoulders straightened, her chin lifting defiantly. "Yes." Her voice was firm, unyielding. "I love him." The words hit Frankie like a punch to the gut. Love? Did she mean it? His heart raced as he looked at her, seeing the raw vulnerability in her eyes. She was terrified, but she stood her ground, her body shielding his. For a moment, her father was silent, his face unreadable. Then, with a flick of his wrist, he signaled the guards. "Take them both." Manda fought, her screams echoing through the halls as the guards dragged her away. Frankie struggled against the men holding him, his body straining as he shouted her name. But it was no use. They were too strong. He was thrown into a cold, dark cell, the door slamming shut with a finality that chilled him to the bone. He pounded on the door, his voice hoarse as he called for Manda. But only silence answered him. Hours passed, or maybe days. Time lost meaning in the darkness. His body ached, his heart hollow as he replayed her words over and over. "I love him." He never got the chance to say it back. Then, just when he was losing hope, the door creaked open. A shadowy figure slipped inside, the dim light revealing Manda's tear-streaked face. Frankie. He was on his feet in an instant, his arms wrapping around her as she sobbed against his chest. "Manda, how did you?" "There's no time," she choked out, pulling back to reveal a stolen keycard. "I bribed one of the guards. We have to go. Now." Frankie's heart surged with hope. "You're risking everything." Manda's eyes were fierce, her voice unwavering. "I'd risk anything for you." They moved through the corridors, sticking to the shadows as alarms blared in the distance. Manda led the way, her knowledge of the palace's secret passages proving invaluable. They'd reached the hangar, a sleek ship waiting for them. Manda's fingers danced over the controls, the engine roaring to life as she guided them into the stars. As the planet faded behind them, Frankie released a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. "We're free." Manda's shoulders sagged with relief. "Yes, but we can never go back." Frankie looked at her, his chest tightening. She'd given up everything, her title, her home, her family, all for him. He reached for her hand, his fingers entwining with hers. "I don't care where we go, as long as we go together." Manda's eyes shimmered with tears, her lips curving into a trembling smile. "Together," she agreed, her voice a whisper. She leaned into him, her head resting on his shoulder as they drifted through the stars. The universe stretching out before them, infinite and full of possibilities. For the first time in his life, Frankie felt truly free. And with Manda by his side, he knew he was exactly where he was meant to be.